All right, we'll go ahead and get started if you guys are ready. So I'm Steve, Sylvia. This is Steve Kitterman. We're two of the developers on the Story Maps team. Today we're going to be talking about how you can actually go ahead and customize our Story Map apps that we have hosted on ArcGIS Online. Some of the customizations will be done on ArcGIS Online, so you can keep them hosted. Some of them you'll have to download and host yourself on your own servers. So this is going to be more of a technical discussion about how we can actually customize the story maps and not more of an introduction of how to get started. If you want to know how to get started with our builder apps, how to use our applications without having to be a developer, you can go over to our booth in the expo right now. We've got a couple people over there, and we'll be happy to give you some introductions after this presentation. So what are we going to be talking about today? We'll give you a brief introduction to what story maps are and how to the reasons we make story maps, a brief technical architecture of how we develop our story maps and how the code split out, show you some demos on how to customize them, talk about our road ahead and what's new, and just listen to what kind of questions you guys have for story maps as well. So to get started, what are story maps? What makes them different from other GIS applications or other templates that Esri has to offer? Story maps are really simple web applications that combine web maps from ArcGIS Online with other multimedia content, whether that's photos, videos, audio, other text content, or even embedding additional web pages into geography-based stories. They're really intended to inform, educate, inspire your audience on a wide variety of topics. They're really intended to be a place after you've done your analysis, after you've explored your data, to share that with others, whether it's management or in most cases it's going to be the general public. So some of our guiding philosophies when we make these story maps and why we make certain decisions about keeping them simple or the features we add into them. And these are good philosophies to think about as you are thinking about how you might customize your story map to make sure they still kind of relate in this same workflow. First off, story maps are really simple. We try to keep them as easy to use as possible. We try to make sure they're, for those that are coming to your stories, that they don't have to be technology experts. They don't have to understand exactly how the web works to understand your story. They also don't have to be subject experts. They should be able to get a lot out of your story without having to understand the topic from the beginning, because that's what you want to teach them about. So for example, a GIS application might have a table of contents where you're turning layers on and off. Instead, in our application, we're giving tools to the author to toggle layers on and off as as the story progresses. So the end user doesn't have to know about when should this layer be turned on versus this layer be turned on versus this other layer being turned on. Instead, as an author, you get to choose, well, this is the point of the story. I'm talking about Wolverine habitat. So automatically the Wolverine habitat shows on. The end user doesn't have to experiment with that. Second, they're single purpose. Making sure your story is as simple as possible also means keeping it as direct as possible. As we're building these tools, we really want to make sure that the authoring experience is as simple as possible. Compiling the content in the story should not be the burden. As we're creating our stories, it's really about, or the time we spend creating our stories is mostly comes down to how we refine the story, going back, looking at and editing the story itself, thinking about what images make sense, and mostly stripping out a lot of extraneous data that in the end might cause confusion or added complexity that is not actually useful. We also want to make sure the story maps are available as broadly as possible, no matter where your users are coming from. We've seen that in a lot of cases, even 15 to 20% of our viewers might come from a smartphone. It should work on a smartphone, it should work on a tablet, it should work on a desktop. All of our story map apps are responsive. They work on the same URL will work for everything. They'll just respond and adapt based on the screen size. They should be engaging. They shouldn't be passive. It should draw the user in to interact with the story. Sometimes very long text blocks or just, especially with short attention spans, can just dissuade the user from actually reading the story. Giving interactive content, whether that's maps or web scenes or throwing in videos or broad, big photos just to capture the user's attention is a really good way to go. And mostly, it should be for everyone. It should be understandable. Like I said, it shouldn't you shouldn't have to be a technology expert to understand how to use a story map, and you shouldn't be a subject expert. If you're explaining your topic to the general public, think about explaining it to your mom. If your mom can understand it, if your grandma can understand it, you're probably going down the right route when you're creating these story maps. So that's mostly what story maps are. Those are good guiding principles if you're trying to think about how you create custom story maps. And now we want to show you some examples and explain the technical architecture behind that. So I'll give this over to Steve.
All right. What I wanted to start out with is just showing a couple of simple examples of how story maps have been customized. I thought it'd be good. How many of you guys have customized a story map by raise of hands already? Oh, wow, good. Okay. And how many of you is this the first time customizing a story map? That's great. Okay. Well, then some of this might be information you already know. But I thought it might be good to show you guys some examples. So this first one here is a map journal, if you're familiar with some of our templates. And they have a semi-transparent, you can kind of see the Grand Canyon behind this text block here. They've gotten a little bit creative with the color on this little home and the different dots. So it's a little thing, but a tiny little customization that we don't include that really makes the story pop. So just to show you an example that the customizations don't necessarily need to be something huge. Sometimes it's something little that matters. Here's a different one. This is a map tour. And once again, you have the logo, but then the header, all these different buttons, sets the theme. Obviously, we're looking at public transportation here. And even the little pink ribbon on the bottom, which matches up with the logo, that's custom. And that's just a little example that makes things attractive to people. And one with a little bit more customization, this is a short list that has a nice little cover page at the beginning. You see these on a lot of different articles, and it really draws users in. And then when you click down, you get to what you kind of typically expect from a short list, except for the header is all done with a background all the way across. And then instead of the tabs being, this is food, this is architecture, you have little icons for the different sports. They could cram a ton of different sports in because they just use little icons that show each one. So I thought this was a pretty clever example. So just to kind of give you guys an idea of what you can do. Of course, there's much more in-depth customization as well. But these are some little examples showing some things that can be done that I thought were pretty cool. So going on, I just wanted to mention at the beginning that all of our code is on GitHub. So github.com/Esri. And if you just Google Esri GitHub, it's the first thing that shows up. And then you can just search for our specific templates, if it's Map Journal or Cascade or Map Tour or Shortlist or Crowdsource. And we try to keep things consistent between our apps, but some of our apps we released for the first time last June. Some of them were released for the first time in 2013 or 2014. And so there's differences. And so you probably hate to hear this, but just read the manual, read the READMEs for each one. There'll be specific information. I'm going to talk a little bit about generals, but there will be specific things you need to do to customize each different type, and of course to build it or self-host. So with that being said, we're built on top of the ArcGIS JavaScript API. Most of our apps are using the 3.x, 3.20 most recently. And so of course we're using the Dojo as well. And that means that we're using asynchronous module definition, AMD. So our code's modular based on that format. And with some exceptions, we're not using any overarching frameworks like Angular or Ember or React or Vue. And recently we've gotten into a little bit more with React with some of our templates. We may talk about that more later on. And then additionally, we have other libraries that we pull in to have utilities. There are things that maybe we want an image gallery or a color picker or a scroll library. But in terms of big things, jQuery for DOM manipulation, Bootstrap for UI components, and then Lodash or handlebars for the HTML templating. And then more specifically with how our code works, we tend to split up the builder and the viewer code in terms of kind of the guts of the application. And so for viewer, you'll see it kind of like this diagram shows on the right with main view and builder view. Those are the pieces that really drive the application at its core. But partly because our builders are WYSIWYG, as you're building it, you see basically what your user is going to see minus maybe a few buttons. And so we share a lot of the code between builder and viewer. In fact, most of it's shared. And then additionally, we have code that we share between our templates. Things that like authenticating you with ArcGIS Online, or UI components like a header or a share button or something that we'll share between them. And then also with our code, with the UI components, we group the files by domain. So for example here, this is a little small to see on the left, but if you're changing the code for the share dialog in some JavaScript, and you realize you need to tweak the style, chances are likely that it's called share dialog.css and it's in the same place. And that makes it much easier than having to dig through a whole different directory to find something that should be applying to what you are there. So those are just a couple paradigms that we follow in most of our applications. And that's for our source code. So that's literally the code that we write to build the story maps in the first place, is distributed there. But we also distribute the minified source code. So this is built and everything is minified and optimized. And you can get this on GitHub, just on the downloads link as it's shown here in the little red box. That'll give you the minified version. And then if you go on the Story Maps website, if you're familiar with that as well, on the page that details each specific app template, there's a download app link that will get you that. And we'll talk a little bit more later on whether you want to use the source code or the source code or the minified source code, depending. So there's a couple different levels of customizations. The most basic, of course, is some of the CSS tweaks you might want to do. And if you're using our map journal template, then you actually don't even need to download and self-host the code yourself. So in that case, you can kind of forget everything I just told you. This is done through the builders. We'll show you an example in a minute, but there's a view source button, and you can actually directly in there add a style tag and enter custom CSS. And that CSS and other HTML elements, you can't add in script tags because that's a security issue. So that's just for styling that you can do things like that. So we'll get more to that in a couple demos. And then in our other applications, to modify the styles, you would download. In this case, all you need to do is download the minified code. And in the index.html, there's a special style tag, and it even has, a little hard to see here, but it just says custom CSS rules. So there's a dedicated style tag you can throw in there, add your own styles, overwrite ones that we set right from the index.html. So that's a pretty convenient way of doing it. And if you want to get into the behavior, into the JavaScript, there's a lot you can do with the minified version without having to actually dive into the source code itself. So we expose some lifecycle hooks in our apps, and this is currently in a little file called custom scripts. And it's a little hard to tell from that image, but basically that's a Dojo topic, so it's just listening, you're subscribing to a couple of different events. So for example, the app will throw out when it's ready, when everything is initialized and rendered. In different stories, if you switch sections, it might tell you that, oh, hey, you're in a new section now. And you, as the developer, can listen in for those events and say, okay, when the app is initialized, then I want to add in my custom, base map switcher here, or whatever it is that you might want to add in. And then additionally, in that file, we also expose a window object, this app. So if you just hit window.app or just app in the console, you'll see it. And there's a lot of really useful information on here. The idea being that you, as a developer, can manipulate different parts of the application even if you're not cracking into the source code itself. Things like, show me all the maps in this template. Let me control the UI elements. Let me change things. Let me manipulate the data directly. These are all things you can do. So quite a lot of power there. But if that's not enough power for you, you can, of course, get the code directly from GitHub as, either clone it or download it and get the source unminified version that we use. And there's details in the README that we'll go through. You can set up a development server for most of these pretty easily. And then you can build it so that it is eventually minified and optimized using grunt tasks that we've already set up. So in the end, you can have kind of the same experience, but if you need to do more in-depth customization, you can. So I should use the source of the minified version. And I would just say, use the path to least effort. Be lazy. If there's something that you don't even need to download the code for, don't worry about it. If you can do something without having to grab the full source code, do that. If you can make a tweak in just the index.html to the styles, for example. But of course, if you're going to modify existing behavior to how we do something, or if you need more in-depth integration, maybe you're listening for events that we don't fire off, or maybe you need to know I want to know exactly when the user is authenticated, and the minute they are, I want to do something. Or maybe it's when they click a certain tab, then I want to change something. So those are some reasons you might want to dive in and use the source code. So first of all, for demos, I'm going to go ahead and show the most basic example. So this is, like I said, you're in the map journal application and you want to change some styles. And like I said, here you don't need to go and download any code or self-host. So that's kind of nice. So here I have a little app that I wrote, a map journal that I've created from ArcGIS Online. It's hosted on there. And as you can see, there's not much to it. It just has just a big home section and some text, then a map on the side. And it looks like I've gotten to the wrong Palm Springs. Well, not wrong, sorry, if you're from there. I went to Palm Springs, Florida, instead of California. Oops. And those of you that are familiar with Map Journal, you know that this is a story action. So if you click on this kind of link-like thing, it'll change what you see over here. So sure enough, if I go there, it'll take me to Palm Springs, California, which is where I want to be right now. But you might want this to look a little bit more like a button. Maybe you want all of your buttons like this to look very specific or different. So coming in here into where we edit this side panel, you notice that there's this view source button. And there we have the corresponding HTML that builds this out. And what we're looking for to change that little link, of course, is this little anchor tag right here. So what we can go ahead and do is we can just add a class to that, something that we can identify. Maybe we'll just call it a rescue button to quickly take us to where we should be. And let's go ahead and add in some styles. So this is just like an HTML editor. So just like writing normal HTML, you can throw in any styles you need here. And so in this case, we're just going to go ahead and style that button, anything with that class. And for the interest of time, I've just thrown in a couple styles there that'll make it look nice. And when you're done, then you have, voila, your little button. And of course, it works just like it should have before. So that's one quick way that you can do things in here. And it doesn't just have to apply to things that are in that side panel. You can hide the header. You can change different buttons. You can make things wider or narrower. So that's kind of a cool example. But just one piece of advice before I turn it back over to Stephen is do look inside these templates. Many of our templates have a very limited amount of customization that you can do as they're hosted on ArcGIS Online. And then you can get your hands dirty and customize things. But there are also a lot you can do in Map Journal. For example, you can change the font size, the font style, make colors a certain way. And in templates like our Map Tour, you can go through and you can customize the theme, the color theme, explicitly with color pickers. So I just recommend that look and see what these can do. Obviously, there's not a ton, but if it does suit your needs before you even have to download and self-host, you can do that.
Cool. So I'm going to go a little bit farther than just custom CSS. There's a few more changes you can make. The first one is a change that you can make with the ArcGIS Online Assistant. If you're not familiar with the ArcGIS Online Assistant, it's a tool where you can actually see the underlying JSON configuration for every single item in ArcGIS Online, and you can actually change some of those options, especially with our story maps and other configurable app templates. You can see the behind-the-scenes JSON configuration and modify it as you need to. So the one thing you'll see here with my bike accidents with corporate Ipsum in it is it's just using the default theme. In Builder, to keep things simple and to make sure it's as easy as possible to make the best looking story and not have bad decisions for if you're not a designer, we tend to limit the number of themes you can choose from. These are themes that we've decided they look really good. We've had a designer look at them. For the most part, most of them are fully accessible to those with vision impairments or things like that, or other accessibility issues. New in, March, in the last release a couple days ago, we now allow your ArcGIS Online Organization Administrator to set a shared theme. So that will allow you to just set the header color, the header text, the main background color, the main background text, and link colors, and a button color. So if your organization administrator chooses that option Now when you open the map journal, map series, and a couple other templates in ArcGIS Online, you will now automatically see your organization theme applied to it, which is a really good way to start. But there's a couple times that may not be ideal, and you may want to go beyond just the current themes we have here. Maybe you're working on a special project for your organization that requires a different custom theme. Or possibly we've decided to put those colors in a slightly different place than you would decide to put them. Because that option's not there, the configuration is still stored in ArcGIS Online. So what I can do is I can open up the ArcGIS Online Assistant, and if you just Google ArcGIS Online Assistant, you'll find it. This is basically a view of my content. These are your folders here on the right in the blue, and then you can expand them and see the content inside. On the top panel here, you have a few options. This is a little bit hard. You have a few options of what you can actually do. So you can copy content between organizations, between members. You can view the item JSON, which is what we're going to do. And you can do a few other things like see statistics of your content. So in my case, I want to view item JSON. And that will highlight everything you can actually, every item that you can do that with. I'm going to find my bike accident app here on the side. And you'll notice there's two different JSON configurations that come across with this item. The first JSON configuration is the item configuration. So when you hit the item page in ArcGIS Online, this is what you see. This is the configuration for the title, the thumbnail, the tags you have set, the sharing reference, all those kind of things. So you can actually see that here and understand it. Going down below, this is actually the data that's being behind the story map. So this is all the story settings, the theme, what layout you've chosen, what font you've chosen, and actually the content itself. The text is in here. Every reference to web map item IDs are in here. All the videos you've shared, all the images you've shared, all those URLs are referenced in this data. So a couple people have asked in the past, how do I actually generate a story map? A really good way to do that right now, we don't have full documentation behind it, is to use a builder and create one that kind of looks like it, and then you can actually copy the JSON. Using the REST API, you can publish out new items that match that JSON format, and you'll see a map journal with that configuration. But for now, I just want to go ahead and edit the theme colors a little bit to match my map theme in this case. So in here, I've got the theme settings here, the theme settings and theme colors. I can click this edit button right here. And I'm just going to grab some settings I made before and paste them in. Let's see. So you saw there when I pasted that in, it's actually validating my JSON. And if it's invalid JSON, it won't actually let me save it. It is a good idea to just copy a version of this, save it into a text editor, just in case you completely mess something up, you can go back to your original. So the reason I did that is because I just copied the wrong place. I included that colors text up there. Paste that in, it's valid. I can click save. And once that saves, I can come back to my builder, refresh it. And you'll notice here, now the background of the main panel is going to match actually the background of the map, just to keep that color consistent. The link colors now match the red points in the map. And I've made the navigation bar just black, just to make it look nice. So this is great. This is a great way to add some extra colors and change that a little bit more beyond just beyond the few options that we have. And you don't even have to understand CSS because it's just hex value colors that you're just putting in place of a JSON. But to go beyond that, if I wanted to add more custom CSS, I could do it with the CSS editor, or putting the CSS in the source view like Steven showed. Alternatively, because I know I'm going to download this because I have a few other things I want to do with it, I can go ahead and put it in the body tag. So the first thing I'm going to do, I can go to the Story Maps webpage, click on the Apps tab, and this is going to list out all of our apps. I'll find the map journal because that's the app I'm working on. Click the Learn More button. And I can scroll down. This is a great page to have tutorials if you want to teach someone how to use the map journal app. It has full tutorials about how to use that builder. It has a gallery of examples just to get you inspired. And there's a filter on that gallery for customized stories. So you can see only map journals that have been customized to see how you might customize it and how those customizations look if you want to do something similar. But going down to the bottom, we have that developer section. So here you have two options to download. As Steve mentioned, there's a couple of different reasons. If you want to just host the code on your own server and get a custom URL, if you want to do minor CSS tweaks, or in my case, I just want to add a couple, listen to a couple events that the app fires off to make a data-driven map journal, and I'll tell you what I'm going to do in a second. I can download this Minified source version. So everything's packaged up. I don't need to worry about installing Node and running a build script to make sure it works and loads faster on a production server. Alternatively, I can go to GitHub and download that full source code. So I'll just download the app. I've done this previously just to speed up, just in case conference Wi-Fi slows down. So right now I have the app. You'll notice because it's the Minified version, we only have about 8 JavaScript and CSS files. If you were to download the full source code, you might find 40 to 50 different files, all nested in different ways by that component view. If you're working on the share dialog, you see everything in context within that share dialog folder. We have some resources for the translation strings for a couple image logos, things like that, and then the index.html file. With the Minified version, you pretty much only need to worry about the index.html file, and for scripts, in the app folder, there's a custom scripts file here. So to start, if I just download this, host it on a server, I open it up, I get this. Not very exciting because it's not configured with any app. So the great thing about our applications, everything's hosted on ArcGIS Online. That configuration stays in ArcGIS Online. So if you have a couple team members that are actually building the content of your story and editing the content of the story, they can continue to work on the online builder. Even after you download it and host it and are making some changes, they can continue to work on the online builder, add new text, add pictures, style maps. And you don't have to, as the developer, you don't have to worry about all that. They don't have to ask you every time they want to make a little text change, which is great. So if you look on the end of the URL, everything's referenced by an ID in ArcGIS Online. So I can just grab that. And I'll come back to my index.html file. Right toward the top, you'll find a configuration options. I'll paste the app ID, save it. And when I refresh, now I have the exact same story that I had in ArcGIS Online, but it's now hosted on my local server. So I mentioned I want to make a couple CSS tweaks. So if I come back to the index.html, I'm just going to grab some CSS real quick. Come back to the index.html file. Scrolling down just a little farther, right at the top of the body tag, this might be hard to see, there's a comment that says, add custom CSS rules here. I'll paste that in. And so what I'm just going to do is just style the title, and where I'm going to place some data-driven numbers in the map journal, I'm just going to style those numbers so they are bigger and they pop. So when I save that again, I'll refresh it. And again, we just see some of those simple CSS tweaks. Now all my headers for each section have that red color scheme just to bring that theme across and make it look nice. So in this case, I'm building a map journal about bike accidents in Washington, DC. I've got a feature service in ArcGIS Online. I actually have about 5 or 6 different layers in there of the same feature service, but each one has a filter on it. And in the map journal, it has an option called main stage actions. They're similar to normal hyperlinks, but instead of linking out to another page, you can actually update the content of the main stage, which is where the map is right now. So in this case, by default, I'll see all the accidents in DC, but I have additional links down here that I've set for viewing different bike accidents based on the weather conditions. So you might explore different patterns. Are there more accidents in the rain, or do more accidents happen in a certain place because there's mist or something like that? So I can click on those and actually see those filters get applied. So you'll see here I have on each one accident counts. That's just a placeholder so I can show you where this is going. If I open up the original builder, so now I'm back on ArcGIS Online, not on my server, I can click this edit button, and now I'm back to click on the source view. This is exactly where Stephen edited the CSS. So I'll scroll down, and you'll see this is that main stage action. It just appears like a hyperlink, but it has a special story attribute with an action ID. And that action ID is, you'll see that's linked back in the AGO assistant where you can explore the full JSON configuration. Now I've just added a simple span tag here. So the span tag is just a place where I can give it a unique ID for that DOM element. It just makes it easier later on if I want to insert content into the map journal at a specific place. Because the map journal is dynamic and it loads based on that JSON configuration, your DOM elements are actually being created on the fly when the app loads. It's not actually in the index.html file to edit. So by putting that span content here and referencing it with a unique ID for each place I want to set that content. So that's for the all places. Here's the one for the Sunny with a unique ID for Sunny. I now have a place that I can very easily query with JavaScript and just replace the inner HTML file. So I'll save that. And now let's go back to my text editor. I'm going to just grab some JavaScript, and then I'll explain what I'm doing in a second. So for the custom JavaScript, if you want to add that, we're just going to open the custom scripts file. By default, we give you a tie-in for that Dojo topic, which is the event listener that you can subscribe to. And in most cases, you usually use the onReady app to configure something. So we just put that in by default so you can see how that's working out. I'm just going to replace that. We're going to keep the Dojo topic. But in this case, so the map journal, one of the events that it has is when the story changes, when a new map loads within that section, fire an event that that map is loaded and ready to be used. So I'm just going to listen to that event. And if it matches the first map ID, then I can grab the map. And so all of ArcGIS Online web maps, when they're loaded into the API and they run through the create map function, all they really are is another map object, a standard map object that's pre-configured and has the layers already added to it once you get it back. So you can navigate down the layers or the map object tree just as you would see in the JavaScript API. So in this case, I want to grab a point layer, that original point layer in the map, which you're using the ID, so it might not actually match what you see in the table of contents. But again, if I go to the AGO assistant, one of the tricks of this, I can open up the web map. And the data behind it, you can actually see all the operational layers, all the base maps. The title here is what you actually see in the My Content, but there can be multiple layers with the same title. So it's better to actually reference the ID of the map, the layer, and I can grab that ID from this AGO assistant. You can also find that by querying it out through the API, but this is just an easy way to find that. So coming back here, so I just grab that point layer, and it's a feature service, so I can submit a query to the feature service to make sure I'm getting all the points and matching all the features. So in this case, I'm going to query all the features and just return the features field that is for weather. I'll query those features. When it returns, I'm just basically going to loop through them and set up a little calculator here. By default, they start at 0. And every time a feature matches one of those weather conditions, it's just going to add to that weather condition. So lastly, I can just query that ID selector of that span tag I added in the map journal source editor, replace the inner HTML with that number count. So when I save it, you'll see the accident count text be replaced with a live number, if this works correctly. Come on. There we go. So there's 232 accidents, 153 that were in sunny and clear, 12 cloudy, 2 freezing rain. There's 4 missed conditions. So normally, if this was changing, the editor of the map journal would have to manually update that anytime the text would change. But now it's automatically being calculated by the app, and you don't have to update that every time. So, and just to show you that, I'm going to open up the feature service. I can open up the map editor, open with full editing controls just so I have access to edit that feature service. And let's just pretend there's a new accident up here in Rock Creek Park. Really all I'm concerned about is the weather. We'll call it mist. And maybe there's 3 cyclists involved just to set the size of the point. And we can go back to the map journal. So this is 4. When I refresh this, that calculation is going to happen every time that map loads. So now there's 5 mists, and we now see that point up in the map journal. And so how I found that developer key, as Steve was, or the event key, as Steve was mentioning, we have our full README on every pretty comprehensive README for all of our apps. Within there, we have a developer guide. This gives you instructions how to set up your developer environment if you are using the full source code and you need to run the Node build system, Node and Grunt build system. But within this developer guide, we also have all the event keys and triggers that you can tie into really easily. And they're all documented right here. So I'm just So just to give you more inspiration, as I mentioned, every single application, when you click on the Learn More, there's a gallery, and you can filter that gallery by just customized stories. You can actually do that at a global level on the gallery page as well. So if you want to just get inspired about how other people are customizing story maps, that's a great place to just explore those resources. For more information about customizing story maps, to find more tutorials, quick tips, simple best practices about how you can customize, we've started a developers blog. It's developerscorner.arcgis.com. I've got a resource, a link later, I think. We also have a link on our homepage under the resources tab. Or if we just Google Story Map Developers Corner, you should find it as well. But this is a great place. We have different levels. Let's see if I can open this real quick. We have different levels to get started, best practices, quick tips, and then for every level of the developer you are, we have some great examples. Even if these demos aren't the exact demos you want to use, they're a great way to get started to see how we're customizing our apps and how the code structure works and just how you might actually start interacting because you might be using the similar events and setting up those events in a similar manner. So it's a great resource to get started. Another thing I want to show you is we have a new newsletter on our Story Map site. It's called Planet Story Maps. It's going to be a monthly newsletter that we push out in an email. And it's just going to show you the best tips and tricks, some of the best new story maps in ArcGIS Online. If you want to subscribe, we just have a sign up on our banner page there. So what's new in story maps and what's coming? In this last release, our Cascade app came out of beta. We provided a new gallery enhancement to it, so you can really start adding and organizing images in a really great manner now. And we also had a lot of speed improvements and bug fixes, especially with 3D web scenes to make sure they're more performant, especially if you have more and more 3D scenes in a single app. We now have image upload directly in Map Journal, Map Series, Shortlist, and Cascade now. So you no longer have to host your images separately on your own servers. You can easily upload directly in the app. We've also added a new feature search and map search in our Map Series and Map Journal application. If you have a feature layer or other point or polygon layer in your search and you set it up in your web map that you want the geocoder to search for those features, the map journal map series will read that and allow you to drop down and search those features in the map journal map series. You can also now add organizational geocoders and configure those both through the app. It'll add it automatically, or if you want to configure those using the AGO assistant, you can configure which ones actually get saved and can be used in the application. Support for shared themes now in map journal map series. Cascade and Shortlist also support shared logo if you add a logo to your organization settings. The Shortlist also has a new way to manage places outside of the builder. If you want to, we call it kind of like a pass-through mode. If you're building a map, a web map, just with a CSV file because you're coming from a version 1, or you want to dynamically edit it outside of the builder, you can now choose use them as is, and you can edit the web map, and all those updates will be reflected in the final view of the shortlist. And lastly, all of our new builder apps are now translated into all the standard ArcGIS Online languages, so you're no longer just American use only. So where are we going over the next year? Our big plan for this year is to kind of take a step back and really focus on the basics. We're going to create a new code base for all of our apps going forward. Primarily, we're going to focus on building this code base with a Redux and React workflow, a more modern code base that should be quicker, should provide a more modern and flexible layout system. We're also making it a component-based system, so it should be easier to customize and add to if you're a developer, or if you want to kind of have a plugin system that will be supported. It should give more options for that as well. It should also have a more consistent data structure to make it easier for developers, especially if you want to dynamically generate story maps and give you better access to where the data is coming from instead of being referenced down nested into the app structure. All the asset management for images and text and videos will be up at like a high level in the JSON structure. And we're also planning a lot better documentation for our developers. As we write this new code base, we're planning to document it all with JS documentation, so you can actually see every method that we write should have documentation behind it as well. So these are some resources I have for you. Links to Developers Corner, support page, our GitHub pages. We love it. If you have issues, submit them to us. We read them there. Even better, if you fix those issues, we'd love to collaborate with you. It's, as we said, everything's open source. If you have a pull request, we'll take it. If you've made some great stories, especially the customized stories, Rupert up here loves looking at them and talking with you. And he would, if you go to My Stories page, which is just a tab on the home page, you can actually see all the stories you've created, and there's a button to just submit that to our gallery, and you can end up in our gallery as well, filtered it under the customize if that's what you choose to do. Lastly, we are hiring other developers. So if you are interested in working for our team, come talk to us. And if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Tips on embedding story maps in other websites via iframes to make sure they're completely responsive and work well? Is that generally a good practice? Or?
Yeah, so all of our apps, let me just open up. I'll come back to this page in a second so you can actually see it. I'm just going to open up, let's say, Cascade here. In the Share button dialog, we have an iframe code for you that you can use to embed. Go ahead and use that. It will work responsively based on the app. So the responsive design, it doesn't depend on if this is an Apple iPhone. It's based on the width of the screen size, so it should work. Some of our apps that have a banner, like the map series, I'll show you one of those. No, that's not map series. You can put an embed parameter on it, and it will actually hide the banner, because theoretically, if you're embedding the app, then you're adding additional content around that application. Conference Wi-Fi doesn't want to work for me. Here we go. So just after the app ID, I can put an ampersand embed. And now I no longer have that full header, it's just the tabs up top. Any other questions?
I'll ask you. What do you suggest around versioning? I know you release a new version of the story map, but then I've already got one built, but I'd like to take advantage of the new feature in the new story map. Is the only way to basically to take advantage of that is to redo the application or move your modifications into the new template or the new application?
Yeah, so a really good workflow. The question was, how can I make sure I get the new updates for when the map journal map series, when we update our templates, how can you get those updates into your customized version because you've already downloaded the source code? So the workflow I like to recommend is, instead of just downloading the source code from GitHub, actually use the clone button or fork it to your own account. GitHub already, in the GitHub workflow, there's already a process for, if you've made changes, you can now pull from a upstream repository, which would be the source code repository that we put out, and you can watch that for changes. When a change happens, you would pull down those changes, and there's a GitHub merge command. When you merge it, it will basically go back and apply our changes, and then reapply your changes automatically over top of that. Every now and then you might have a simple conflict and you might have to resolve, but it's just a process of reading a file line or a line in a file and just making sure everything merged correctly. But it usually should work pretty easily that way. Cool. We'll be up here for a couple more minutes. If you have any more questions, feel free to stop by. And we'd love if you can have a chance to fill out our survey. It should just be in your application. I'll just leave these resources up so if you haven't got a chance to copy them. But in the events app, just find our events, the story maps, customizing story maps, and there should be a survey associated with it.